context in which our local decisions are taken. So I'm going to talk about the global and national situation before focusing on Cornwall. Harry will talk about the benefits that the community can reap from alternative energy, including wind. So let's remind ourselves for a moment about the global issues of climate change and energy. In truth, we should treat the climate crisis as an emergency. Governments across the world are already doing so. Scores of countries have plans for reducing carbon emissions to the very minimum, including our own. This is unprecedented in world history. They see, as do the most prestigious institutions in the world, that this situation is a threat to our existence, and we have to approach it just as we would any other threat. Only 2 weeks ago, the International Energy Agency warned, and I'm quoting, "We have a responsibility and a golden opportunity to act. Energy-related CO2 emissions are at historic highs. Current policies would likely send global temperatures at least 6 degrees centigrade higher and confront future generations with significant economic, environmental and energy security issues." So when we discuss what may appear to be a purely local issue, let's not forget that it takes place in a global framework. The second part of this context, the global context for the debate, is the supply of and demand for energy, particularly fossil fuels and above all oil and gas. Oil remains the engine of our civilization. We pump out nearly 90 million barrels of it every day. That's over 3 billion gallons. And it has 1,000 applications, including generating electricity. It's a fantastic source of energy, it's incredibly versatile, and it's starting to run short. That means a long, erratic decline in the supply of oil ahead of us, and an unstoppable rise in price. Oil has risen in price tenfold in 20 years. Retail gas prices have risen 15% in each of the last 5 years. And now we hear that Centrica are raising them again a further 15% next winter. This is not sustainable, whether you're talking about the world economy or our personal budgets. So rapidly, we must get our act together and work out how to reduce our dependence. So let's do a quick review of the national situation. On the climate crisis, our government has committed us to a massive reduction in CO2, 50% by the mid-20s, 80% by 2050. To achieve this, we have to use every means at our disposal. Energy efficiency, investing in alternative energy, and changing our lifestyles are just a part of this. The transition movement, preparing for a low-carbon future, is a part of the response too, seeking a transformation in our habits and behaviour, as well as a simple change in our energy mix. On energy, the national outlook is pretty grim. We are ever more reliant on imported energy as our own resources run dry. Our extraction from the North Sea is now running at half what it was at its peak and declining. Our gas is imported, our coal, and much of our oil too. Our national grid is already reliant on imported energy, whether nuclear energy from France or even wind energy from Holland. To add to the urgency, while the demand for electricity is on the rise, our nuclear power stations are coming towards the end of their lives, and our coal-fired power stations are being closed down as we speak, unable to operate because of their massive CO2 emissions. From here in Cornwall, we rely on Hinkley Point and Didcot, an old nuclear reactor and an even older coal-fired power station. Neither of them has long left. The result nationally of demand increasing while power stations are closing is an electricity supply gap opening up in the next 3 to 5 years. That's not long enough to build any nuclear power stations, even if we decided we need them. In fact, the earliest that a new reactor could be brought online at Hinkley Point is 2022, and that's being optimistic. But it is long enough to install alternative forms of energy. Unfortunately, we're still not ready with wave power, and hydro, though efficient, is very limited. However, we've already seen what can be achieved with solar and offshore wind, and we know what we can achieve with onshore wind. So wind energy is an absolutely central and essential part of our energy mix if we are to survive. We can approach this extraordinary situation with trepidation and fear, or we can be bold and excited by the amazing opportunities it offers us. What we can't do is say this is real, unprecedented and urgent, but it's for everyone else to sort it out for us. So, what should we be doing in Cornwall? There are many ways we can reduce our dependence on oil and electricity right here and now. We can drive slower, travel less, give up flying. We can insulate our houses better. We can buy woolly jumpers rather than putting the heating up. We can turn the lights off. We can share lifts and even share baths. So you see, it's not all doom and gloom. We need to do all of that, even if by taking our time over getting there. And what can we do to help generate electricity right here, right now, in Cornwall? 3 years ago, we generated 3% of our electricity here, all the rest being imported. We have a mounting decline to reduce our reliance on imported energy. Do we need to do so? Of course we do. With energy prices rising, energy insecurity getting worse, and a supply gap looming. And the only game in town is alternative energy. So let's have a brief look at each one. Solar energy. Yes, brilliant. It's free energy. The price of insulation is dropping, so the prospects are good. We get more hours of light in Cornwall, I didn't say sunlight, light, than anywhere else in England. It has disadvantages. There's less light in winter when the energy is most needed. It doesn't generate at night, and solar farms require land. Nevertheless, there's a lot to be said for free energy, whatever the drawbacks. Hydropower. Yes, an excellent source, but the application is very limited because our rivers are so small. Geothermal, again, yes, though more for heating than for electricity generation. Wave power. Wave power sounds great, but it's still at the research stage. And most of us here know that the ocean will probably pulverise any structure that dares to stand in the way during a storm. And tidal power, great prospects, and we have the technology, but no applications have been suggested for Cornwall. That leaves wind. I want to remind you of some of the obvious facts about wind turbines. Number one, they're easy to install, with a tiny footprint, so they barely interfere with farming or any other activities. Number two, there's a rapid CO2 payback period. The latest research indicates that all the CO2 embedded in the foundations, the manufacturing, transport and installation of the turbine and the maintenance of it is repaid in 3 to 6 months for onshore turbines. Number three, the fuel is free. The significance of this, with energy prices rising, cannot be overestimated and means that wind energy, largely immune to market forces, will become more and more competitive over time. Even now, good energy have held their prices for 2 years, while the big six have been pushing their prices remorselessly upwards. Number four, they're long-lasting. We are talking 25 years or more, maybe much more, of free energy. That's not bad. Number five, they're really easy to decommission. Basically, you undo the bolts, lower the turbine, and take it away for recycling. No cooling towers to blow up, no reactors to dismantle and decommission, no pipelines to dig up. Number six, they're more attractive than pylons or transmission masts or cooling towers or smokestacks. Number seven, they're cleaner and less wasteful than power stations or incinerators. No smoke, no enormous quantities of thermal energy lost to the heavens. As a country, we've already invested in massive and expensive wind farms in the North Sea, which should be contributing 17% of our total electricity supply by 2020. Our target is 35 to 45% for renewables by then, so we need to get all we can from onshore. There are limited sites for larger installations in Cornwall. Once you take out areas of outstanding natural beauty, and towns and villages, and flight paths to airports, and archaeological sites, and valleys, and roads, and power lines, there's not really a lot left. The need is so urgent, however, that while we already have to site sensitively, we need as many and as large as we can accommodate. For Ladock, this means, do we want 3 quite large turbines, or do we want 30 or 40 smaller ones, or a mix of the two? What I believe is not responsible is to say that the country needs wind energy, but then object to every single application, as I'm afraid the CPRE has done in Cornwall. So my case is this. I said a few words about the global and the national situation, and about Cornwall, and about ourselves here in Ladock. I believe that we face an unprecedented situation in the world and here in the UK. We have to reduce our CO2 emissions and our reliance on fossil fuels and on imported energy. We have to make the most of free energy. We have to use every means at our disposal, and wind energy, wherever we can exploit it, is an essential part of this. The choice is ours. I urge you to support the motion. Thank you.
Cornwall Protect recognises that wind power is an available renewable energy source that has a place in the mix of energy as we are building to combat climate change. However, Cornwall Protect feels its importance has been greatly exaggerated and its impact could be counterproductive. Current plans for its massive expansion are ill-considered, we feel. They lack coherence and they are not consistent with the basics of the real green agenda, which is about reduction and using less. In speaking against this motion, it is important to state the weaknesses that make wind power an unsuitable replacement for power stations. Wind will produce electricity, but it doesn't blow all the time. Wind is unpredictable. It provides an intermittent supply of electricity. Wind cannot provide constant electricity needed by such things as freezers. We have to be honest about what wind power has to offer and what depending on wind power for your electricity supply would be like. Having set the scene, a few words, an explanation about Cornwall Protect. We are an alliance formed to warn against the growing threat of wind turbines to Cornwall's greatest sustainable asset, its landscape. Remembering landscape is not about somebody's view. Landscape embodies history, land use, human culture, wildlife, and local character, the identity of Cornwall. The original threat to this was from wind farms. The latest threat is now coming from the proliferation of applications for single turbines up to 100 metres in height, over 400 in the planning process across Cornwall. Cornwall Protect are concerned about climate change and global warming as any other group in Cornwall. We recognise the imperative to find sources of renewable energy that will replace fossil-fuelled power stations. But Cornwall Protect opposes this motion for three reasons. We know wind turbines do not produce the benefits claimed for them. They do not do what it says on the tin, in the words of the advert. The misguided financial support for wind power is undermining the development of other forms of renewable energy. And I will have to say something about Oliver's claim that wind power is free. Wind power is also threatening our greatest natural resource, the special environment that is Cornwall. Let us begin by looking at some of the basic claims made for wind power. Take an example of a single 1.2 megawatt 80 metre turbine. I'm told that this will power 600 homes and it will save many, many tonnes of CO2 emissions. If a turbine did take 600 homes out of the national grid, I would applaud. I'd be really keen on that and I would not object. However, if wind power is only produced intermittently, how could it power 600 homes? The calculations about powering homes is based on averages, and averages is not like real life. If a turbine can produce over a year, the same as households consume, okay, but it doesn't produce it when those households actually need that power. The claim to power homes, in our terms, has been misleading and continues to be. It is the national grid that powers homes, and any power taken from turbines in Cornwall is fed into the national grid. We need to look, therefore, when we come to saving tonnes and tonnes of CO2, as to how the national grid actually works. The national grid predicts our demand for electricity for every half hour of every day, and they balance supply to meet it. This balancing job is really key to the national grid. Ensuring electricity appliances work when we want them to, day or night, windy or calm. They have a statutory duty to provide sufficient power at the right frequency to a very fine degree. And as such, I mean, if they provide too much, light bulbs burst. If they provide too little, we have blackouts. It's a really key role for the national grid. The national grid also works very hard to predict the amount of wind power available and feed this into the supply side of the equation. But predicting the wind is like predicting the weather, and forecasts are only considered accurate for a 4-hour period. Given uncertainty about the national grid, they always operate backup generators to cover wind that is penetrating the national grid. And this backup generation is gas-powered and therefore produces CO2. Wind power developers talk as if whole sections of the national grid shut down when turbines begin to work, but they never quite explain how this happens. And they don't do that because it doesn't actually happen. Because power stations are massive thermal units, and like oil tankers, it takes them an awful long time to turn round. You can't just turn them off and on. The national grid accommodates wind power by a slight reduction in output from the power stations, but always with backup generation available. The claims for carbon dioxide emission reductions, therefore, are vastly overstated, and just like the numbers of homes being powered, we feel those claims are misleading. The government produces irregular figures to indicate exactly what emissions wind power is saving. Just to give you a bit of information, it was accepted by E.ON, one of the largest energy sort of companies, at a parliamentary select committee last year, that for every 1 megawatt of wind power that is penetrating the grid, there is almost 1 megawatt of backup generation acting at the same time. Therefore, we feel that the benefits claimed for wind power are at best misleading, at worst false. Wind is an intermittent energy source that cannot do the job of the power stations. Wind cannot energise the national grid. It cannot provide the flexibility to balance supply and demand effectively. Wind comes and goes. However many turbines you build, we will always need sufficient other generation capacity to meet peak demand when wind isn't blowing. With wind, we are not building a replacement energy system, we are building an alternative system, which has little impact on emissions, but it does have an impact on our pockets, because it's costing a fortune, and it's not free. The cost of backup generation is estimated to rise from the current 18 million to 400 million by 2020, as the use of wind turbines increases. Now, moving away from the national picture, and the big problems of wind, let's look at the Cornish picture. Why have we got so many applications for single turbines across the county? Why so many in Ladock and Provost? Not to mention the 11 turbines at Cubert and Crantock, and the 20 turbines within a 6-kilometre radius of Bude. I could go on. What is going to be achieved by these developments? The wind rush is caused by the feed-in tariffs. To put it plainly, money. I have an advert here, which is for a wind single turbine 330 kilowatts. I quote a few figures. Installed cost £700,000, total annual revenue £207,000, estimated total profit on investment over 20 years £3 million. So much for free energy. The money that pays for that will be coming from our electricity bills. That strikes me as a nice little earner. Given the importance of issues involved in fighting climate change and the growing awareness I feel about the failure of wind power on the national stage, is it right that we have this unplanned free-for-all, created by financial incentives, scattering turbines around Cornwall, one on every hilltop? Is this an energy policy? Local residents are right to be cautious about these developments. What is more important than the place you call home? What gives developers and landowners the right to impose these structures on their neighbours, to make their neighbours' lives miserable? And let's be honest, that's what happens. Those who suffer this attack on their personal space that sustains them then have the privilege of paying for these structures through their electricity bills. I return to the question, why is this happening? This rush for turbines? Because these are commercial profit-making developments which would not be happening if there wasn't a lot of money to make. And personally, I feel that much of this money could actually go to being invested in other renewable energies which provide constant sources of energy, which could therefore replace power stations. Any suggestion that a single succession of turbines across the county will help to make us self-sufficient in energy, or will have a major impact on carbon dioxide emissions, flies in the face of the facts. Single turbines only benefit those who have the resources to erect them. It would seem that renewable energy technology is available to the few. The many pick up the financial costs, and fuel poverty is the fate of the most vulnerable. One and all, indeed. I ask you to reject the motion.
Are we living wisely in the world? Well, I'm sure as many of us agree here, of course we're not. We live hedonistic lifestyles filled with convenience and indulgence at the core. We don't think twice before picking up tomatoes from Holland, lamb from New Zealand, and energy from, well, does it matter? As long as we turn on the switch and the light goes on, it doesn't matter where the energy comes from. But you see, now we're paying the price of this convenience and of these actions. And where we spend our money is the most important vote we have. It determines whether money circulates within our own economy, benefiting our family, our friends, and our neighbours. At the moment, money leaves our Cornish economy for energy, straight to Russia and Kazakhstan. And the thing is, wind is something that we have right here in surplus, as I'm sure many of you will agree. We've all moaned about it enough, surely. So let's consider energy. It's nuts to think that something as essential, and I don't use that word lightly, as energy, to our livelihoods, is imported from overseas. Now, if you were the king or queen from a tribe called the Angles, and you had to depend on something outside your shores for your future security, with your knowledge of history, would you ever become dependent on something coming in from the outside? Of course not. It's a laughable concept. We know that with political imbalance, vulnerability, with watching our hard-earned cash sail overseas, we would never entrust another nation with our life source. We need to take control back of our energy source so we're not vulnerable to other countries' demands. So we know that we need a strong national policy, we need a committed government. Our government has pledged to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050, but this comes from communities, this comes from passionate people like all of us here in this room. Think of it like a jigsaw. So you've got a box, you've got a picture on the front, and you know what you want it to look like. You have to turn over all the pieces first of all. You have to make the sky first of all, and go around the outside, and all those bits one by one, until you get the whole picture. And this is exactly what we need here. You know, for a strong, resilient nation, we need strong, resilient communities. It's up to us to make Britain's clean future a reality. For my generation's sake, and for future generations. We need to protect Cornwall. We need to protect our children and their children for the icy winds that come from overseas, that make Cornwall not as attractive as people assume it will always be. We need to find harmonious ways of protecting what we have here for a sustainable future in Cornwall. And Danny, I think my idea of protection and your idea of protection are two very different things when it comes to protecting the future of Cornwall. So, how can we move on from this? What's next? What do we do? We know that social enterprises like WREN, who I represent, and Low Carbon Ladock, work well in turning a cost into a local benefit. So think of community energy groups here. With WREN, we aim to have 30% of our energy supply coming from clean sources by 2015. That's an attainable figure. So with this, we aim to generate at least £200,000 into our community fund, and this will be reinvested into local causes, as chosen by our members. It's all democratic. And for example, for our first handout, we had £5,000 after maybe this is a year's working together, and this went straight to the food bank because our members agreed that it's not acceptable that in this day of age, in the richest country in the world, or one of the richest countries in the world, our neighbours have to choose between being cold or being hungry, and that is not acceptable. So community groups like these will have a tremendous impact in Cornwall, and every locality can do this. With renewable energies such as wind, they're becoming more efficient, they're becoming smarter, they're becoming cheaper. Nothing's stagnant, it will evolve. We need to develop, and we know we need to look towards storage, and there are areas where it's not picture perfect. But think about the mobile phone, we didn't start off with all our smartphones, did we? We had I didn't obviously, but suitcases, mobile phones. And we had, it's all development, and this is where we need to develop. So let's put that into perspective. So for Ladock, as Oliver pointed out, 3 turbines could power Ladock. And of course, I acknowledge that wind is not, it contributes when the wind blows. And so this is all part of a centralised system, We need to decentralise, but also this complements the central generation. So, if you look at wind farms, so if everyone were to, if when wind farms are set up, so everyone buys from their local energy wind farm, and if they know that from buying from that company, the profit is actually being invested back with social benefits in those areas, you've got this wonderful virtuous circle where money is actually going back to the stakeholder, which is fantastically exciting, because this is surely the model of the future. Now, I like turbines. I'll just say that, I think they're beautiful, and I know I'm not alone in that. I know that I'm actually the majority, as surveys have just told me, and I'm not afraid to say I really like the look of them. And as my dad pointed out earlier on today, people my age are used to seeing them there on the landscape. We don't know anything different. In fact, if you took them away, that would look more alien to me. But anyway, I'm going off and I'll go over. So, one of the main problems with protesting against these developments, or protecting Cornwall, should I say, without wind farms, community-owned or otherwise, we won't be able to develop these local benefits. It's a no-brainer to me. I think we should welcome these with open arms so we can ensure our future in Cornwall. You were talking about the future of Cornwall, the landscape as being very important, Danny, and of course it is. Oh God, that's why I'm here in Cornwall. I could be anywhere else, earning a lot of money in London or something, but I'm here because I love Cornwall and I love our landscape. But if we wreck it, if we sort of pollute our air with nuclear or all the rest of it, there'll be no one here to enjoy our beautiful landscape. We need to look towards a sustainable future so we can enjoy the landscape that is Cornwall. So we need to look financially, I don't know what that is. So, economy. So, we need to become more resilient here in Cornwall. At the moment, we've got, we've got tourism and we've got second homeowners. And this is not, these are fragile income streams. We would never say that this is where we would like our money to come from as a county, thank you very much. Of course we wouldn't. We need to claw back a stable industry like we used to. We used to develop energy here, and why don't we do that again? Why not make sure that we have jobs in the green sectors right here in Cornwall? I would love that. So why don't we just take a bold step and say, look, we're going to invest in wind because we have a prime position here in Cornwall for it, and if we don't, then someone else will. So, the cost of investing, let's go straight to the end. So, David Attenborough said, he likes turbines too.
As a local lad from Port Navis, it does actually, coming up to Ladock, it's a bit like going abroad, so thank you very much for having me here this evening. We'll start now, Hugo.
Yeah, you're on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Bruton from Cornwall CPRE. And this evening I will be presenting the planning and landscape issues related to wind turbines in Cornwall. It is a fact that wind turbines are part of our energy mix, but they are neither an essential or worthwhile part of that mix. CPRE's basic mission is standing up for the countryside, and everywhere we go we find people opposed to the blight that wind turbines are causing across our county and across the region. 3 points. Turbines are obvious. They cannot be hidden away discreetly. They intrude on protected areas like areas of outstanding national beauty. Their cumulative effect spoils the views of many communities, and not just the one where they are situated. Communities find their movement mesmerising and the impact on the tranquility of an area. Their noise and flicker impacts on sleep patterns. Now, only 25% of Cornwall has any formal protection, and parts of that are now under attack from the scourge of wind turbines. The Coalition has a new planning law, the National Planning Policy Framework, or NPPF. The central tenet of the NPPF is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. It is, in fact, a green light for developers and wind turbine companies. Now, CPRE supports renewable energy. In Cornwall, we can have wave and tidal power, river hydropower, biomass, small-scale solar power, and thermal energy. We now come to numbers. CPRE nationally has asked this coalition government, how many turbines are enough? No answer. Cornwall Council appears to have no answer to that question either. Danny majored on the costs that we're all paying for this stuff. Let me give you 3 examples of what we are paying for, because taxpayers across Cornwall are subsidising wind energy across the UK. 3 points. Now, the Daily Telegraph is hardly left-wing, has repeatedly written about the subsidies received for wind turbines by a certain wealthy Lincolnshire landowner, £1,000 per day. That landowner happens to be the Prime Minister's father-in-law. Let us look also at the Diocese of Exeter, £50,000 a year for a few turbines on church land, and the diocese claims it's all God's work, rather like Goldman Sachs. We wonder how many turbine applications there would be if these ineffective eyesores, produced by cheap labour, often in China, and in most appalling working conditions, were permitted on a commercial basis only. Looking now at the health implications of wind turbines, a couple decided to buy a house in a rural locality. Then along came one of the major utility companies and erected several wind turbines near their home. The couple suffered health issues from the noise and flicker and took the major utility company to court. This utility company settled out of court without admitting any liability. To escape their environment, this couple sold up but had to discount their house price by 20%. Now, these situations are either happening or will happen across Cornwall, from Morver near St Ives to Kilhampton near Bude, from the Gribbin Head near Foy, via Probus and Grampound Road to the Lizard. So there is a penalty, both health-wise and financially. Now, who can blame landowners if there is a deep trough of taxpayer money with a notice saying, help yourself? But there is a moral and ethical side to all of this. Why should one group of society benefit unfairly at the expense of the mass of power consumers? Wind energy, with the subsidies involved, are forcing up electricity bills for all of us here. Now, even when councils have the courage to say no, government inspectors often say yes on appeal. One example recently relates to an estate joining a beautiful National Trust property. The inspector said that the need for renewable energy outweighed any landscape considerations. To their credit, Cornwall Council does turn down or oppose some applications. For example, it has opposed the Davidstow application, which was withdrawn but will certainly reappear. I was in a meeting recently in London with Greg Clark, the Planning Minister, discussing planning issues. Now, this coalition talks a lot about localism, and shortly after our meeting, Mr. Clark made a speech in favour of local people at parish level having a greater say in planning. He said that people attacked as NIMBYs instead deserve respect because they are trying to protect their communities. It is wholly reasonable to want to protect our home, the place where we should have peace and quiet. Now, we know that these applications are touted around by developers, but often applications are submitted without proper photographs to show the impact and without any acoustic evidence. Rarely is an environmental impact assessment required, and permission is being granted actually in areas of outstanding natural beauty in Cornwall or where they impact on the local AONB. Many here this evening grew up in Cornwall. People come to Cornwall on holiday, 5 million a year. People retire here, people start up and run their businesses here. Cornwall's quality of life is vital to everyone. Will they still come if their beautiful view is damaged? Now, we know empirically that wind turbines do damage tourism. Now, you may or may not like Donald Trump, but he knows a thing or two about tourism and hotels. and he has stopped halfway through his major tourist development in Scotland because of a plan to build a massive offshore wind turbine farm. And he's offered £10 million to local groups to fight their scourge. I asked, he didn't reply. I came to the subject of wind turbines with an open mind about 3 years ago. The proposition, after all, seemed attractive. Having read and listened to both sides, I am convinced that wind farms and turbines are a scam. I would recommend others to read The Wind Farms Scam by Professor John Etherington. Dr. David Bellamy, the environmentalist, writes on the front cover of this book, "Wind power is a swindle. Please read this book and find out." So I did, and it is. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Sarah Newton describes, and she's a member of the Common Science and Technology Select Committee, and she describes the meeting with Charles Hendry, the Energy Minister, in March this year. Amongst those topics discussed was the national target for onshore wind energy production. The target in question is that by 2020, 7 to 9% of the UK's energy needs will be met by energy produced by onshore wind facilities. Regarding this target, Mr. Hendry said, in order to get to that 7 to 9% figure that I mentioned, the farms that are built, consented to and under construction or are in the planning process, and of course here in Cornwall a large number are in the planning process, this takes us to beyond where we need to be to deliver that target. We can start to see that we've identified many of the strong resource areas already. The large-scale farms, or almost certainly the areas which could accommodate those where they have a good, strong resource, have been identified. I suppose it means lots of wind, I don't know. Perhaps it also means where we won't do any harm, but if so, you ought to say so. Have been identified and are well into the process already. The number of wind farms that are built, under construction, consented to, or in the planning process, takes us beyond the level where we need to get to. Now, if Cornwall Council could have this statement, not just elected members, but frankly some of the officers who have this belief that Cornwall has to be self-sufficient in energy, they might look at these applications rather differently in future. In other words, is there really a need to have very many more? I quickly distinguish between small-scale ones for farms, for example, which are tiny, and where it does go genuinely to the milking parlour. Or, as in Wadebridge, there's one now, the application has just been approved. As a parish councillor, I said, yes, we should, which was on the roof of a laundry to power their steam irons and their tumble dryers. But surely this does give that questioner, councillor, a bit of an answer. That namely, really, it seems that the need, in other words, wind has helped to fill the gap that they need.
Just 1 second, just to say, that was a political statement from the government. Thank you.
I'll be very, very brief indeed. The real issue is, I think, that we have to decide how important is the use of wind to reduce carbon emissions and how effective. Now, it's accepted, I think, on both sides, and everybody here, that whatever view we may take of climate change, it is something that we have to react to. We have a duty to react to it, to this generation and to future generations. The government have set out what they want to do. We've heard the targets. But now, unfortunately, the fact remains that the most effective way to reduce carbon emissions is to phase out quickly the remaining coal-fired power stations. They're the ones that are guilty of serious emissions. It may sound unfashionable to say this, but to replace a number of those with gas actually makes the most sense in terms of the shortest and most effective and cost-effective way of reducing our carbon emissions. Gas prices have risen, that's been stated, but they are beginning to level out, and wholesale gas prices are actually falling. In the United States, partly due to the arrival of shale gas, something through fracking, which is going to happen in Europe on an increasing scale, whether people like it or not, it's going to happen. This is going to be the shortest and most effective way of actually reducing our carbon emissions. Now, why do I stress this? Because we have rightly turned to wind, and absolutely correct. But is there not a danger, which has been identified, of cumulative impact, especially in places where the wind blows, which includes Cornwall, of actually beginning to destroy what is most valuable to all of us in this room? We all love Cornwall, with most of us being brought up here. Certainly I brought up in Northstall and now live near Wadebridge. And do we really want suddenly to wake up and realise we have an industrial landscape? Finally, though, I would just like to pay tribute to the Ladock and the other community groups wanting to be green. This is admirable, but there are so many other ways that you can do this. You mentioned some of them. I don't believe that community wind farms, because after all it hasn't happened up to now, offers a very sensible way forward. I therefore would like simply to finish, I believe, by suggesting that at the moment subsidies for wind are too high, and on government projections the total payable on wind farm onshore wind subsidies by 2030 is going to be no less than £130 billion. Can we, as a nation, with the present economic hard downturn, afford this? It isn't as though wind farms are producing employment and benefit income to Cornwall. Most of the income goes elsewhere, so overseas companies or to companies up country. And certainly no employment. And if we do damage tourism, I know opinions are different on this, we will live to regret it, all of us. I think we should all bear in mind that whatever we may think of wind farms, beautiful or not, we need to recognise that we can have too many of them. We can despoil our countryside. We can change our whole landscape into a semi-industrial one. To do that would be a tragedy, and I don't think the next generation, although they've got more energy and enthusiasm, it seems, and that's good, will thank us for that. So I would urge the audience tonight to say enough is enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll just start with a very short story. Ethel Broad, who is well known to all the Ladock residents, told me a couple of years ago that in 1920 her grandfather, who was a bit of a techie for the time, decided that he could put a small turbine in the outflow from the watermill over the road, and this would be sufficient to provide electric light for the village. He could find no one to join him and invest anything in it at all because the general opinion was electric light will never catch on. Times are changing and changing faster than at any time in the last century, probably in history. All natural resources, with the exception perhaps of wind, tide and solar, are in decline and facing continually high demand as the new economies grow. They are often concentrated in areas of great political instability. Furthermore, we're entering a phase of closing old generating stations, gas, coal and nuclear. And as a result of poor planning, and we can't overemphasise this, by successive governments, we cannot possibly replace it like for like in time, even if it was desirable economically and environmentally. There's thus never been a better time to save energy, and it behoves us all to do what we can in this regard. Our existing fossil fuel resources are declining fast and have a pronounced upward trend in demand and cost. That isn't going to change. The cost increase being far in excess of the cost of renewable subsidy, about 15% per annum for wholesale gas, for example. If we want to avoid this kind of inflation going forward, we have to, as a nation, as a parish, de-link ourselves from fossil fuels. There is no other way to stop that inflation carrying on. If we wish to have energy to light our lights and cook our supper, we, that's the people who live here, should take responsibility for providing it. We shouldn't just be offshoring all the consumption that we like to have. And how dare we condemn the people of Hinkley Point to living with a nuclear power station? How dare we expect them to carry around iodine tablets every day in case the alarm goes off? You know, that is the cost of behaving in the way we do. We really need to start taking responsibility to us, all of us here. Fossil fuels and nuclear are also very, very heavily subsidised. The latter to the tune of some 7 billion per annum, which would amount to about £350 for every household. By the way, uranium is also in very short supply. There may well not be enough to supply a wholesale move into nuclear power in this country. Nuclear power stations take a very long time to develop. They will not be ready to fill the looming energy gap. And it's also worth noting that Germany and Japan, for example, are moving right out of nuclear. There is increasing talk of prospecting for uranium in the Foul Valley, about 3 miles from here. How do we feel about an open cast uranium mine 3 miles away? I think we'd see some pretty active public meetings then. If we dismiss the idea of wind turbines being an important part of our clean energy production, then we should perhaps be prepared to embrace mining for uranium here. Another little point, we use some 5,600 megawatt hours of electricity here in Ladock every year. The vast majority of which is actually from the general production from the likes of EDF and E.ON. If we had 2 or 3 medium-scale wind turbines, albeit intermittent, we could actually become a small net exporter of electricity. If we own those turbines, that will be money coming in. So not only do we avoid paying all the money out to ghastly places like the French government and that sort of thing, we'd actually be bringing that back home. This is something we can achieve. We can do this, and we should make every effort to do so. There is a case even perhaps to produce more power than we use, because it's no good us being fine and London, for example, not having any electricity at all. We need to make the most of our natural resources. We've done it in the past with tin and copper and clay. To do so would be a typically good Cornish response to commercial opportunity. Although this time we should take much more care that the profits actually stay here in the county. I can tell you tonight that all the current owners of wind turbines in the parish have agreed to make annual contributions to our cooperative funds. And those funds have been spent already on community projects within this parish, including traffic calming outside here. We've surveyed tourist tourism businesses to assess impact. So is that my alarm?
Yes.
Pretty much.
Okay, guys, we have a responsibility. We can do it and we should. Thank you.
I was trying to be fair, Jeremy. You've got the local boy there. Can I just, before I ask for a straw poll again, I'd like to first of all say an enormous thank you to the people who put this on, and it was really a lot of work, particularly. To our speakers, who obviously, and it was obvious to you all and us all, had taken an enormous amount of trouble and care in what they had to say, and that can't have just been done overnight, so I think we should be really very grateful to them. And also, most importantly of all, one, for your coming, and secondly, for the way this evening has gone. Do you know, when I started this, I thought it was just a local little parish thing, and then it grew. And then people kept saying to me, do you know, you really might have a problem. People might get really abusive, and it won't be a balanced debate, etc. And I think you will prove those people wrong. I think we've had a very balanced debate. We've had people speaking from each side of the spectrum, and I hope not only has it been helpful to you all, but it also has been an evening that is worth you all coming to. Now, before you go home, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to tell the difference, but would you like, first of all, could you put up your hand if you feel that wind power is an essential part of the local energy mix?
Is this for Ladock or just in general?
I think we're talking about general. Now, would you like to put your hand down? I mean, I agree with you, actually, that this is quite a difficult straw poll, because it's quite a different matter, speaking of what you want this country and all of us to do for our children and our grandchildren by looking at different forms of energy. It's quite different if you're actually talking about a wind turbine that might be put up very near your house. And I think at this stage we're talking about, generally speaking, whether we feel that wind power should be part of that energy. Now, people against the idea that wind power should be part of the energy mix, fewer. Whether it is changed or not, I do not know, but I hope that you've all had a good evening. Thank you very much.